Hey, Joe. So, wanted to ask you a question about something that comes up often in children's ministry. What do you do when a child wants to be baptized? And do you have some time to
Yeah,
answer those things?
a great question. So on a regular basis, kids want to get baptized, and some of it's associated with kids' spiritual development. They want to grow in their faith. They want to take steps, and there's other times where kids just see a giant pool and they want to get in the water. So it's key to really figure out the difference. Um, my personal preference is that kids wait a little while before they get baptized because it's a significant experience, it's a significant decision, and you want them to think about what they're doing, not just do it because it's cool because their friend is doing it or because they want to get in the pool. We want it to be an experience that they remember that really falls into the biblical guidelines where they're experiencing what God really wants them to experience through that process. So I think that's key. And I would say if I had to put an age on it, it's best for kids to wait until they're right around that sixth grade age group. So like 12 years old, 11 years old is really a good time because they can start to grasp what's really going on and they go beyond just wanting to get in the water.
Yeah, that's good. How do you explain that to a parent, especially if they're like, my 4-year-old is really feeling the spiritual tug from God. I want to be baptized. How do you explain that to them?
Yes, and that I've had that multiple times. I think the best way to explain it to a parent is really giving them some objective facts. Um, the reason that I think it's best for kids to wait is not that kids are ready to obey the command of Jesus or what Jesus asks us to do at any age. But baptism is really symbolic, and it has a lot of things associated with it that are not concrete at all. And children's minds are designed to understand things that are very concrete. When you get into things that are abstract, they don't have the ability to process that. It's not even it's not a degree of intelligence that it takes. It's really just their development of their mind. And when you get to a certain age, your mind just sees things differently. You're more developed. So when I talk to a parent, I really want to present that to them, and I'll say to the parent, Mrs. Smith, hey, I think it's great that Johnny wants to get baptized. That's awesome. I really like to encourage kids to wait a little while to get baptized. I think the best age for them to get baptized is right around that 11, 12 year old mark. And here's why. Because young elementary kids, they understand things in a very concrete way. When you tell them about something that's abstract, they just don't get it. They don't understand what it's like. And that's why young kids don't understand sarcasm and things like that. Their minds are just not wired or developed to understand things that are very symbolic. And baptism in itself is very symbolic. If you ask a young child why they want to get baptized, they understand it in a very concrete way. They think, I'm getting in the water and I want Jesus to wash my sins away. But the reality is, if you're getting baptized, you've already made a decision to give your life to God, and you've already asked God to wash your sins away. And when you make that decision, and when you ask God to do that, He washes your sins away. But in a child's mind, they associate baptism with washing their sins away, which is really linking it to salvation. And it just gets really cloudy. The reason that we get baptized is not about salvation. And I want to make that clear to a parent. And when you can present it that way in a very objective fashion, and explain, well, I know your child believes in God. I know that your child is following God. I believe he has a relationship with God, and I believe your child is very bright. But here's why it's going to be best to wait, because I think they're going to get more out of the experience, and it's going to be more significant for them. I think that's very beneficial to a parent. And if you can't come to that conversation with that context, you're not going to win that discussion with a parent because in their minds their child is ready.
Right.
But but the reality is it's going to be better for their child to wait because that experience is going to be better. So you want to come with that context to that conversation. You want to make sure that you can explain that to a parent.
That's good. Yeah. So with that in mind, then how do you know when a child is ready to
Mm-hmm.
take that step? Because even if they're older, what are some ways that you can find out if they're ready?
Absolutely. Well, obviously, the first step before you get baptized, you have to make sure that they are a believer, that they've given their life to Christ, that they've already asked for forgiveness of their sins. So that's the obvious step. But understanding if they're ready to truly understand it is key. When you ask the question, why do you want to get baptized? If a child, their first reaction is, I want to get my sins washed away, that's enough to just pause and say, okay, well, let's actually talk about that. When kids are thinking that way, they're not thinking about it correctly, and some of it could be that they just haven't learned yet. Maybe they're old enough. If you're talking to a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, you just might need to say, okay, you've already given your life to God. Let's talk about why we get baptized, and you can actually explain the reasons that we get baptized. But when you're talking to a 6 and a 7-year-old, um, many times they can repeat what you say, but they don't have a full understanding. So they can memorize things, and you just want to hear them out and ask them. Um, you want to figure out, is that conversation best to have with the parents or just with the child or both together, and you have to gauge that situation. But you ask that question, why do you want to get baptized, and see what their answer is. And if they're older, if they just don't understand it, then you explain it. If they're younger, you probably want to do what you can to just kind of slow it down, because your goal is not just to baptize as many people as possible. Your goal is to have a significant experience where kids understand why they're doing it, because that step of obedience is really important, and they need to understand why they're taking that step.
That's great. Yeah, I think that question, that open-ended question to hear from the child, is important. That usually reveals
Oh yeah.
right there, because they'll talk about the water, right?
Yep.
And if they go that direction, you kind of know what to do next. So with that in mind, then how do you explain water baptism to a child? I think you have a really great example that you use with kids. So what does that look like?
Yeah, great question. There's three reasons that we get baptized, and these are all, I'll present these in a way that is very easy for a child to understand. Number one, we obey what Jesus asked us to do, and we follow his example. So Jesus got baptized, we get baptized too. Jesus told us to get baptized, we should follow what Jesus asked us to do. So number one, really simple, and every child can understand that. That's pretty simple. The second thing is, well, why do we do this in front of a bunch of people? Why are people going to surround the pool or the tank and be there? Why can't we just do this by ourselves? And the reason for that is, when we get baptized, it is a public declaration. Now, declaration might be tough for kids to understand, but it's a public way to show other people that we've already decided to give our lives to Jesus. And we do it in front of other people because it's a way of telling the world, hey, I already decided to follow Jesus, and I want the world to know. And I always, in these conversations, I always take my wedding ring off. I say, okay, here's my wedding ring. Why do I wear this wedding ring? It's because 15 years ago, I married Rachel, and I want the world to know that I am married. I'm married to Rachel, and I made that decision 15 years ago. Now, if I take this ring off, and I have fun with this with the kids, so I put this on your finger, does that mean you're married now? And they laugh, they giggle. Wearing a wedding ring doesn't make you married. It's a way to show people that you've already made the decision to commit your life to your spouse. Getting baptized is the same way. It doesn't wash your sins away. It's a way to show everybody that's there that you've already made this decision to follow Jesus. So that wedding ring example is a great way to just give a picture to kids of why we do that, why we do it in front of other people. And then the third thing is, we do this as a symbol. This is a way to remind us, why do we get dunked under the water? And why do we come up out of the water? What is the reason for that? And it's a picture, it's a reminder of what Jesus did for us. So we're supposed to remember that. When we go down under the water, we're supposed to remember that Jesus died and he was buried. And then when we come up out of the water, we're supposed to remember how he was resurrected. And this is also a reminder of how our lives are changed when we give our lives to Jesus. And I talk through that symbolism, and I spend some time talking about that, and saying how when you go under the water, you start out dry, you go under the water, and then you come up, and then you're different, you're wet. When you give your lives to Jesus, this is a symbol. We're supposed to remember we're different now. Everything has changed, and we're supposed to remember what Jesus did for us and how we're supposed to be different after that. And that's the tricky part with young kids, because that symbolism is tough for them to understand. And when you get a child that's too young and you're explaining that, they're going to be focused on, well, okay, I have to remember this when I go under the water, and then I have to remember that when I come up out of the water, or else I did it wrong. But that's not the point. It's truly just understanding the symbolism and remembering what Jesus did, and it's a way just to kind of reflect back on that and understanding that our lives are different. But those are the three things: follow Jesus' example and obey what he asks us to do. The public expression of what you already decided to do, just like the wedding ring, and the symbolism of the death, burial, and resurrection, and how we're different after we give our lives to Jesus. So those are the key things to just make sure you explain to a child. And I use those things if I'm talking to a 50-year-old adult
Yeah.
or a young child, because baptism isn't hard to understand if you can catch those symbolic things. But kids just are not wired to understand that stuff when they're at a young age. So I really try to encourage kids to wait until a little bit later.
That's good.
Yep, good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can use those things when you're talking to anybody about baptism. We'll see you later.